Okay, we are going to do multiplayer tier listing. This is only going to be the multiplayer exclusive cards, not just the cards that are really good in multiplayer. I will do a whole separate PowerPoint guide, whatever, that talks about which cards are going to be different in evaluation based on single player and multi. These are going to be the cards that you only see when you're playing multiplayer and sort of how to think about them, and maybe give a framework for evaluating what makes something strong in this game mode, because it is very different from single player. I waited on this for a long time, even though it was the most requested thing probably on the entire channel and in Twitch chat. One, I thought it was going to be really hard to make, and this is why I'm splitting it up into two different things. But two, I didn't play multiplayer that much. And now I played a lot of multiplayer, one for fun, two for the Frost Prime tournament, which we just did. And I was playing with players that weren't super top level and got, I guess, a more balanced view of what the average multiplayer experience looks like, because my experience with multiplayer before this was playing with only really, really good players. And that made it so we literally never lost, and we didn't really have to care about anything, because I think as a whole, multiplayer is easier to win than single player if you are abusing the things that make it so. The whole purpose of this, or the idea, is to make it easier or more apparent what those things are and what are the really broken, overstated things, because there's a lot of them. Also, we did multiplayer speed running. So I played a lot of runs with really good players, playing very fast, and kind of got an idea of how often we could win doing that, and also what sort of strategies and ideas work. Because you can be extremely degenerate in multiplayer and sort of brute force ideas just because of the way that multiplayer smooths out variance. What I mean by that is really that your draw orders are more fixed. Certain cards are more easy to play because they have synergies that work with other players, or you can rely on someone else to draw their Vuln before you get your Vuln payoff. And in single player, drawing your Bash into Molten Fist doesn't happen every single time you load up your game. When you have 4 decks all trying to do that, it is very likely, because you only need one person out of 4 to draw Vuln, that you're going to get it. That's just one example. This works for all debuffs, a lot of other strategies, but that's a core idea behind why multiplayer is a lot easier and why certain strategies are way better. This is a win rate tier list. We're not going to do speedrunning tier list. Speedrun tier list is like its whole separate thing. As a whole, this is really just a discussion board to talk about what I think is important in multiplayer if you're just trying to win every run. I don't really think it particularly matters what your team composition is. I think multiplayer, just the way that it works, is going to reward you for having more people and more decks and more potions and seeing more stuff. And that is the biggest reason why it's powerful. There are obviously really funny things like doing all 4 clouds like you saw in the speedruns that we were doing, or trying to force like poison accelerant. With 4 players, you're going to see that like key piece way more often, and in single player, you can't rely on like someone seeing accelerant. When it's like a 1 card thing that you're trying to find, it's really hard. But I'm gonna just ballpark average team comps, like I hit random and go. And we did do a lot of that in the Frost Prime tournament practice. We hit random comps and played, and we won every run. So I don't really particularly think it matters what your team comp is. It's more so just, do you understand the core principles behind making multiplayer busted? Every character has 2 multiplayer exclusive cards that you cannot see in single player. And then there's a bunch of colorless cards that are only available in multiplayer. Like half of these are colorless cards and 2 per each character. So let's go ahead and start with each character, their individual cards, and then get to colorless. Starting out with Demonic Shield, 0 energy, lose 1 HP, give another player block equal to your block, exhaust. This has a couple of really important keywords. There's one that's lose HP, which procs all of Ironclad's self-harm synergies, as well as exhaust. So you're proccing something like Feel No Pain, Dark Embrace, whatever. This can often be a really, really easy card to just kind of play. And what you can read this as is really just 0 energy gives someone like 10 to 15 block on average. Even if this is just giving like 5 or something, it's still okay. One thing about multiplayer, and especially as you scale players and go to like 4 players, it's very likely that someone's going to brick. Bricks don't happen every single hand, but when you're drawing 4 times the amount of hands, they happen more frequently. And this is basically covering the one person that is bricking. So you can sort of ask around and see who has the worst hand or can't block, or maybe has powers they really want to play, and you can help them get set up. So if you're able to coordinate, this card gets better. If your group is not coordinating or not slowing down and allowing for this kind of discussion, this kind of card is going to get worse. So obviously depends on how sweaty your group is trying to be. It also is a card that relies on you drawing block in your hand, of course, or having a deck that is going to generate a lot of block. I don't particularly think this card is exceptional. There's a lot of multiplayer cards that are just way more overstated, and we'll get to them. One thing that Ironclad really struggles with in single player is just not having access to weakness. So in multiplayer, you kind of have that covered by some other character, or even just other clads having more chances at finding uppercut, or colorless cards like Shockwave. And you don't really need as much weakness because oftentimes one person can fully cover it. Having more people have weakness is a way of covering draw order problems. But Clad really struggles to block in single player just because of not having access to weak. And that's not really a problem. And so doing something like having Blood Walls and playing Demonic Shield makes a lot of sense. Clad also has really easy access to a lot of draw with like Pommel Strikes and Burning Packs. And in multiplayer, it's a lot easier to pick draw cards that in single player would be kind of punishing. Like in single player, I can't just slam Burning Pact on floor 1 and expect to like be able to get through the act safely, depending on the map layout. Like obviously you can take Burning Pact, but it's not an every run thing. You're allowed to be greedier in multiplayer with drafting because of the way that allies can cover your deck's weaknesses. One key concept that we abused a lot is having someone overscale. So you can sort of have like team roles determined after a couple of card rewards and seeing what people have in their decks. But one idea would be like having one person force infinite. That's going to cover your late game scaling. And so in like the Frost Prime Invitational, I forced infinite to cover my team's like boss scaling because their decks were not really capable of beating the Act 3 bosses, right? So you can really hard cover for that and then have people pick things that are going to allow you to just sort of turbo through your deck and really not do anything else. Like if I am just playing Burning Pact into Bloodletting into exhausting down my whole deck in single player, I'm expecting to take a lot of damage, right? Because I'm not really blocking while doing that. And so you can cover someone else's idea of either having a deck that plays a lot of powers or goes infinite or needs to do something that's not necessarily contributing to short-term progress in a fight or front load. And this is helping to cover that. So really, if you have someone performing that role, Demonic Shield gets a lot better. I think overall, this is just sort of like a very average card for me. I don't think it's like jammed into every deck. I'm not super happy to see it. But if I know that someone's doing something like that, this is going to be something that works. Or if you have like an early unmovable, or you have relics like Anchor or Horncleat, whatever, that are going to produce a lot of block for you unconditionally, you can sort of cover people's brick draws and it allows them to draft differently. So I think a really core concept with multiplayer is allowing your teammates to do stuff like that, which takes a lot of coordination, which is why I think like if you aren't abusing these ideas in general, that multiplayer is not going to feel much easier to you, and which is why people feel like 2-player is harder than single player, which I wholly disagree with. Let's go ahead and move on to tank. 1 energy, take double damage from enemies. Allies take half damage from enemies. When you play tank, if you have 4 players, which I'm assuming you do, 3 people take half, you take double. So that's kind of like 1.5 subtracted, and then you are adding 1. I don't know if that makes sense, but that is how I'm reading this card in terms of total damage incoming. So if like the total damage incoming is 4, you are basically slightly reducing it at massive risk to yourself. Essentially, this card is really only good if you are capable of blocking way too much every turn. I think it's just putting a lot of stress and not really doing enough to help your allies just completely avoid damage. You're better off playing something like Demonic Shield, for the most part, to cover one person who bricks. Basically, all the allies need to build a deck that is capable of blocking, at least somewhat. Because until you draw tank, they still have to do their normal job of blocking the enemy, right? Even if you're building around this idea. And so their decks still need to be able to block, otherwise they're just taking chip until you try to draw into this thing. And then once you do draw into it, there's a lot of stress on you to actually cover, and not everyone is going to be getting full value out of this. So like if someone's capable of blocking 10 or 20 on their turn, and you're reducing their incoming damage to like 5. They don't get any value out of that, right? Unless they're actually getting value out of having damage reduced, it's not doing anything for you, and it's just making you die faster. For barricade style stuff, which was brought up in chat here, this is really bad because barricade wants to be able to store block. And this is basically saying you're never going to store block. It's all going to go away. This is really, really bad. Overall, it's just not a big enough reduction. If this just said like all your allies take no damage from enemies and you take double or something, it could be something. It can work with Diadem, sure. Very, very niche. But overall, I think there's just better things to be doing on this character in particular, and blocking in general is a little weird. Like, a core concept of multiplayer that's very important is to all sort of have decks that want to play fights for similar amounts of time if you want everyone to be living and doing stuff, or having very predetermined roles. And what tank is doing is essentially allowing your teammates to play long, but you have to play very short because this is a lot of pressure. And it's very often that you're just going to be taking damage instead of actually being able to block here. Just kind of weird. I think a better way of mitigating damage in multiplayer is just putting weakness on the enemy or having like piercing wail or debilitates. And so this becomes really not all that great. Overall, you're just never really picking this, especially if you see it early. It would be like a late game thing that's very, very niche. Almost never. Okay, let's go to silence. Flanking. 2 energy. The enemy takes double attack damage from other players this turn. Upgrades to 1 energy. Similar math to tank. I think this one's going to be easier to understand. But let's say I spend my entire turn playing flanking, or I just don't do any damage after playing flanking. There are 3 players still doing damage. Normally it'd be 4. Now we go to 3. And then because it says double, that goes to 6. So your damage output basically goes from 4 players to 6 players, which is a 1.5 increase in damage. And that's not even fully true math because you can still do damage after flanking is played, especially if it's upgraded to 1 energy. But the way that you evaluate a lot of these multiplayer cards should be the total amount of output across the entire team. And most of the time, people should be building decks basically the same as they are in single player, with a few exceptions. Like, most of the engines and ideas in single player are still going to be really good in multiplayer, with a couple of huge standouts. And so most decks are capable of doing damage and blocking and sort of like doing their own thing, right? Flanking is just amplifying that with like very little hoops to work through, and gets very, very absurd very quickly and stacks with other multiplicative damage multipliers. So like Vuln, for example, or Knockdown, which we'll get to, and other copies of flanking. It just gets really, really insane. This is like basically one of the best ways to scale damage. So I think this is very, very easy. S tier doesn't really need to be talked about very much. And yeah, there's another thing. This is a very good point. Good first message, where this is kind of wrapping back into what I was talking about earlier, where all the decks want to try and go for a certain amount of time. And you kind of want to match pace with your allies, because essentially if one deck is trying to like go really fast and kill and not block at all, which is a deck style that does happen in single player, but then you have like 3 Necrobinders that are all just trying to sit there and overblock and store all CHP, and that takes like 8 turns. What's going to happen is like the guy that's trying to go really fast is just going to die because he can't actually kill the enemy. Something like flanking, when you can get lethal a turn earlier, means you don't have to block anymore. You're essentially just reducing block requirements on allies and closing low roll potential of someone bricking a turn where they can't block, because you're just 1 turn shorter in the fight, or less than 1 turn, or more than 1 turn, I should say. Basically, killing the enemy faster is just really good at blocking. And it means that the deck building requirements or deck checks for other players don't have to be met as rigidly. Next up, we have Sneaky. Sly. Whenever another player attacks an enemy, gain 1 block. This upgrades to 2 block, and the energy cost is 2. Really, this is 0 energy most of the time, because it has Sly on it. This is kind of like Giga Afterimage. It allows you to stop playing block and just focus on dealing damage. Your teammates are essentially going to cover block for you, and when you can cheat energy in such a way, again, it helps your allies block because now all of your damage is being done and you get out of the fight sooner. There are other cards that do this sort of job better, but it is still really strong. Like, I think the strongest thing in multiplayer, especially with 4 players, which is what I'm assuming in this list, is when you can do something for everyone because you're getting like 4 times the value or 3 times the value out of a card. compared to this where it's sort of a selfish thing and one person's getting a lot of value. But if you have something like this, it can help you do a lot of damage because now all your energy gets spent on like doing draw and lining up your combos and playing the big broken damage cards because other people are able to block for you, right? It's not quite as good as something like flanking, but it is a block engine for you that oftentimes gets played for free. It's very, very easy. I think this is pretty much easy A and does have some really cool interactions with other multiplayer cards that we will get to later. If you get cross-class combos, it can also be interesting. Like imagine this into Demonic Shield and you're kind of paying off other people for blocking. Again, multiplayer gets a lot better with coordination when you can sort of sync up combos like this and have ideas of like, okay, how is every person in this party going to be blocking? And maybe one person is doing a lot of heavy lifting for one player in particular for that person to force infinite or do some sort of game-winning strategy that's very greedy and slow. Yeah, just kind of an interesting card overall. Next up, Largesse. 0 energy, another player adds 1 random colorless card to their hand. This upgrades to an upgraded colorless card, I believe. For these sorts of things, it doesn't really matter who gets this card. You can evaluate it similarly to reading what a card would say if it said, you add the random colorless card to your hand. When it's only one person, it's very easy, I think, to evaluate because you have a frame of reference for single player evaluations. Just read this as like it was acting as single player and it'll make it easier to figure it out. You can choose who gets this, so it is easy to say like, okay, who has extra energy this turn, or maybe who bricked their hand and can't do anything meaningful. Like let's say the enemy is not attacking and they drew all block. You can Largesse them to give them a card that maybe they can play with their excess energy, right? So I think it's flexible. With more players, it gets better, but not at the same rate as some of these other things. This is still really strong in 2-player as well, just because getting a random colorless card for free is really good boss scaling. It's good long fight scaling, and there's a lot of broken colorless cards that we will get to again. Basically, all the multiplayer colorless cards are pretty overstated for the most part, and having all the multiplayer cards in the pool when you're rolling from them is really strong. Even the solo player colorless cards get stronger in multiplayer, like Gold Axe, because it scales off of like everyone's card plays. So colorless cards were already really strong. I think multiplayer makes the colorless card pool even stronger. This is just like a generically good pickup, and it's still good in hallways. Overall, just really, really solid card. Feels pretty similar to something like Sneaky in terms of power level for me. Slightly better than Demonic Shield. I think Demonic Shield just needs a few more hoops to jump through. But again, being able to choose who gets this is the important thing. If you're not coordinating who has energy, then it's obviously a lot worse. Like if you're not playing with voice comms, this card is not going to be performing nearly as well. But yeah, works with a lot of the card creation synergy stuff. Pillar of Creation on regen to just block randomly. Colorless cards can also generate energy and do a lot of stuff inside of fights. So yeah, really nice card overall. Next up, we have Hammer Time. Whenever you forge, all allies forge as well. This upgrades, I believe, to 1 energy. Basically, whenever I get a sword, everyone gets a sword. What this is doing is really giving your entire party boss scaling. They don't need any sword synergies at all. Just randomly getting a sword in your hand that hits for 30 means that everyone is always going to be able to swing it at the same time. And the fact that it has retain means it works with something like flanking, where one person can play flanking and then all the swords swinging together, and that's your boss scaling damage. You would be very surprised how good just having a big attack that you can spend energy on is. And regen oftentimes wants to be doing this overscaling role in multiplayer anyways. Like, I think as I was playing regen, one of the strongest things I was doing is just spending a lot of energy building my sword. Because in single player, you really can't just ignore the enemies and just build your sword up because you're not making progress. But you have 3 other players covering for that weakness, and you're allowed to just play Refined Blade every single turn and just block. That's going to solve the fight. If your sword gets really, really big, that can be overscaling for a boss. And in single player, you might only have to do 500 damage to a boss. In multiplayer, you have to do like 2,000, 3,000. And so you kind of need to go way above the ceiling. Hammer Time's just making it a lot easier to do that. Like, I remember solving one run with Hammer Time plus Furnace, and everyone got value out of Furnace. And when Furnace reads Forge 28 a turn, it's a lot better. Furnace, I think, in multiplayer is already like a lot better because, again, powers are easier to play. You have people covering your block for you with stuff like Demonic Shield. Fights are allowed to be a little bit more weird where you're not doing any front load job and someone else is covering that. So this is pretty good. I think this card is like one of the better damage solves as long as you're doing some sword stuff. So probably top of A. I'm going to reserve S tier for some of the really, really absurd stuff. But yeah, I do agree with what AJ said in chat here, which is that it's easier for one person to overscale like mad. Say, for example, one defects with creative AI just going insane to beat the boss, rather than like 4 people trying to overscale and everyone bricking their deck with a bunch of powers. So if you take hammer time, you can essentially take this job of overscaling everyone's damage, and then people don't have to take boss damage anymore. This is the one card solve for boss damage, which is a really, really powerful role to fulfill. Okay, next up, we have Glimpse Beyond. 1 energy, all players add 3 souls into their draw pile, exhaust. Capture Spirit does this sort of idea just for 1 player, and that is already a really good card. When you are doing this for 4 players, you're essentially saying 4 players draw 3, which is draw 12. That's insane. If you're curious about how I get the draw 3, it's because the soul takes up 1 draw from the draw 2 on the soul card. And so every soul is basically draw 1 in terms of positivity. So yeah, draw 12 is a really powerful effect. If you were just going to evaluate that for yourself, right? That's essentially just Scrawl, except better. Like Scrawl oftentimes doesn't draw 10 cards. It often draws less than that. And 1 player has a hard time spending energy. When you're drawing for 0 energy for a bunch of people, that is really, really crazy. Absurd card. I think this is one of the strongest acceleration pieces in the game. Very, very easy S tier. 1 person playing this just makes everyone's decks function so much better. Like everyone essentially gets, I don't remember what the relic is that does this at the start of combat, but doing that for 4 people is really, really crazy. And yeah, cross-class synergies with like exhaust on Clad is really, really strong here. Very, very crazy card. These souls also get better with player skill. I've watched a lot of players play, and a lot of new players play now. People tend to just spam their souls and not get full value out of them. You can leave these floating around. Like if you spend all your energy on a turn correctly and like don't need to draw at all, you can just leave the soul floating around for your second draw cycle. It's not just 3 draw, it's like 3 draw whenever you feel like it, and you don't always need to draw. So being able to selectively choose when you do that is really, really powerful. Okay, next, Legion of Bone, 2 energy, all players summon 6 exhaust. I believe this upgrades to summon 8. What this reads as is really all players block 6 with like barricade, right? But that essentially just says like block 24 for 2 energy, which is not a terrible rate. But it's not an absurd rate. Like if you look at something like Impervious on Clad or Blood Wall, block 20 for 2 energy, block 30 for 2 energy, block 40 for 2 energy. Individual characters have that. One big thing about Necrobinder is that you're able to turn this barricade block into damage. And if you're playing with other characters, they can't do that. This is essentially just block. If you're playing like all Necro or something, this obviously gets a lot better. But most of the time, I think this is not going to be like an absurd card. It's not weak. But again, we will get to cards later that are basically direct analogs to this that are just superior in almost every way. When you're playing something like this, because it's not blocking a lot for you, you are more likely to take chip playing it, which makes the reward actually just less, right? You're gonna, as the player who probably has Asti, lose Asti HP that neuters your damage by playing something like this. I think this is kind of just C tier. It's not horrible. It's just not as heavily statted. And yeah, with less players, it just gets worse and worse. If you're playing like 2 players, this is just like really bad. Unless it's like another Necro, but still, I don't think it's great. If you have like Dance Macabre, this can be better. There's ways that it can be stronger, like Intimidating Helmet, you know. Everyone's playing Necro. Like, there's a lot of weird niche interactions. I'm kind of just rating this as like the average case most of the time where you probably are not getting the max value out of this. Let's go ahead and move on. We got Energy Surge, 1 energy, all players gain 2 energy exhaust. This upgrades to 3 energy. If you're evaluating this, this is 1 energy, gain 8 energy. So essentially gain 7 energy, and that upgrades to gain 12, which is like 11. Compare that to Super Critical, which is a rare card on Defect. Holy crap. That's a lot. Especially when you have stuff like this floating around, the Glimpse Beyond. That's insane acceleration. This on its own is a card that Ironclad plays called Seeing Red. A lot of characters just add this card in single player to their deck. And it's doing a lot more than that. So as an uncommon, yeah, Easy S tier. These are like kind of the premium acceleration pieces in multiplayer, in my opinion. These two. There's some other ones that are really, really good, but these are very, very strong. You'll notice these cards that are statted to give everyone something. It's really hard to balance because I think they needed to make it work in 2-player. But when you get to 4-player, it just is giving way too much value. Like, someone doesn't have to draw into this. Combine this with something like Largesses, right? Like going off randomly, or a hammer time, and everyone just gets to swing their swords. On a flanking turn, everyone just gets to play way more attacks, or someone gets to pop off and just set up all their powers. Like, when you have a piece like this, like a support piece like this, everyone's decks just functions so much better, and you're covering people on their bricks. Like, someone can draw all their expensive cards in one hand, and someone's like, hold up, let me find my energy surge, and now I just draw into that, play that, and then you're good. Like, it didn't matter that you bricked because I didn't. And again, when you have 4 players, it's likely one that like someone's gonna brick, but it's less likely that everyone's gonna brick. When in single player, it's either you brick or you don't. It's a coin flip, essentially. I mean, not really, but like rolling more dice is better than rolling less dice is essentially what I'm getting at. And this is a card that fixes a lot of people's decks when they do brick. Very, very strong. Compared to Ignition, the rare card, 1 energy, another player channels 1 plasma exhaust. In 2-player, way more fair. This is essentially equal to Fusion, just played on someone else, which when you compare it to these sort of really broken cards like Energy Surge, Glimpse Beyond, Flanking, even Hammer Time, when you compare it to these and you're only giving one person extra energy and they probably can't dual cast or multicast that Plasma Orb, which is what makes Plasma like really good, it's just not nearly as good. This is really just like, I sack my deck to make someone better. And we don't really want that sort of effect very often when there's so many effects that just help everyone disproportionately. It's just not overstatted in a way that I think works all that great. And it's not something like Demonic Shield where I'm not having to pay energy or like really sack. Like, this is kind of just giving someone a lot of block. Giving someone 1 energy a turn is just not nearly as good. We'll put this in like probably C. I don't think it's like actively negative like Tank is, of course. It's just sort of like not an unfair card. And I think in multiplayer, you really are just looking for the unfair cards. Speaking of which, next up, Beacon of Hope, 1 energy. Whenever you gain block on your turn, other players gain half that much block. The most important thing about this card, and it is broken on its own, okay? This is completely busted on its own. But the most broken thing is realizing that the upgrade makes it innate. And when you can make this innate, it means that every other player now gets to build their deck knowing that you are blocking for them every single turn. And so they don't have to pick block cards. They can focus all their energy on doing other stuff. This works really nicely even in early game with any sort of deck. So the rounding on this rounds down. If you have other Beacons of Hope, right? Let's say you have 2. One person plays a defend for 5. If they have Beacon of Hope, it spills over to the second person that has it for 2. That blocks everyone for 1, right? So if multiple people have Beacon of Hope, they combine together to block for everyone. And if you have 1 point of dex, you play 1 defend for 6 and it rounds to 3 instead of rounding down. So everyone's getting 50% more value with 1 point of dex. So Smooth Stone, any footworks, so many things. Again, compare this to Tank. I'd much rather have this sort of output where I play 1 block for 6 and it creates 9 extra block. So I play 1 energy block 15 after playing this. If every card in your deck reads 1 energy block 15, your deck is really good. And that's like with very little effort, right? There's a lot of cards, even colorless cards that give 1 point of dexterity, relics. And again, in multiplayer, you walk into a chest, you see 4 relics and you get to pick which one you want. So if someone gets a Smooth Stone, right? It's not just seeing 1 relic, you see 4 and you get to pick. You're going to see a lot more relics and you can get Smooth Stone way easier from looking at chests, right? So there's just way easier ways to like abuse this and make this really, really broken. The innate upgrade makes it just completely absurd. I think if they were going to try to balance this, they would need to make this just upgrade to 0 energy or something, or change the numbers on it. But innate makes it way too consistent. Kind of the problem with something like Tank is I still have to draw into it, right? And so my teammates can't completely avoid the deck consideration of having to block. With this, they can. You can pick a little bit of block still to cover, like what the Beacon of Hope player can't block you for. But the Beacon of Hope player now also gets to build their deck entirely focused on just blocking and doing nothing else and having their teammates cover for them. Even in 2-player, this was insane. Like, I played 2-player with Open for a little bit, and he got a Beacon of Hope early, and it just completely invalidated the run, basically. I essentially never had to block, and I was just doing the damage, and he was just blocking for me the entire run. Just completely disgusting card. This is, like, very, very easy S tier. This is, like, the inverse of flanking in terms of just like, this is the damage output card and this is the block card, right? It's basically doing the same thing. I think overall, dealing damage is a little bit more important in multiplayer, again, because of this like ending the fight a turn sooner thing is really important. If other people are still blocking turns on their own, Beacon of Hope is not getting extra value, but doing extra damage is basically always extra value. Yeah, just kind of insane, like really, really gross. Next up, Believe in You. Another player gains 2 energy for 0. With 4-player, this is a lot better than 2-player. You cannot target yourself. It would be really quite good if you could. But again, if you have someone that's like playing really greedily and adding all the draw cards to their deck, this gets a lot better. And it also, whenever someone bricks and draws other expensive cards together, you can cover for them. So again, communication kind of important for making this better. It doesn't scale quite as crazily as Energy Surge, for example, but is still quite strong. I think this is like less hoops to jump through than Demonic Shield. So probably just better than this, and probably better than Largesse as well. It's essentially like, you can read Largesse as like, just print a Believe in You. How bad of a card would that be? You know, it wouldn't be that bad. So I think Believe in You is quite good. The fact that you can target it's really nice. It just needs some coordination. You can enable some really, really funny stuff with this as well. Next up, we have Coordinate. 1 energy, give another player 5 strength this turn. This is kind of weird. You need someone else to be able to use this 5 strength really well. And again, if you're having 2 players try to line up in 2 separate hands, a combo of like Coordinate into like Radiate or Coordinate into a Blade Dance or whatever, that gets a lot harder than just trying to play a power and do that the whole combat and never have to like draw it together. Coordinate has this issue of not being that flexible of an effect, like compared to something like Believe in You, which is just energy. Energy is very flexible. Everyone can use it. Strength is not something that all characters can use. So it's less likely to line up. It just overall is not increasing damage by quite the amount. Like an average case, or like maybe even a good case, is like 1 energy deal 15. Like if someone's playing 3 attacks or maybe a multi-hit attack or something. If someone can like really abuse it, it's like okay, but it's sort of just a subpar damage common. It's only temp strength, so it's not really boosting someone, and you need to actually coordinate, like similarly to the card's name. Overall, I think it's just really, really weird. Feels somewhat similar to Ignition, just a little bit worse than that. If it gave everyone 5 strength, it'd be a very good card, but Potions, Flexpot, for example, is better because you don't need to draw Flexpot with the thing it works with. And now you're requiring you to draw this with the thing it works with. And it's not super likely that's going to happen. There's a lot of things in this game that don't scale off of, or multiplayer, I should be specific, that don't scale off of strength, but scale off of like number of card plays instead. This is just like one of the worst ones of it. The other ones seem a lot stronger. For example, Gang Up. 1 energy, deal 5 damage, deals 5 additional damage for each time another player has attacked the enemy this turn. This upgrades to 7 additional damage, which is quite strong. So when you compare this to something like Coordinate, 1, this is scaling off of everyone else in the party and not just scaling one person in the party. When you get a Gang Up from like colorless card at Niao, that carries damage throughout basically the entire run, like at least first and second acts when people are still playing strikes and whatnot. It's quite powerful to be able to just say, hey guys, I have Gang Up in hand, and everyone now no longer has to worry about blocking, and it just does like 100 damage. Like everyone plays, 3 strikes on their turn. That's very realistic. So just play 3 damage cards, right? And it can also get better with stuff like Silent Shivs, which is also very common. If you do the math on this, this is like dealing 50 damage basically. In that case, that's just a shit ton of damage compared to something like Coordinate. So yeah, big early game damage carry. I think we're throwing this in A tier, probably above Sneaky. I really like this card, especially early game. It basically requires nothing to work. Even if one person completely bricks and doesn't play any attacks at all, the damage output is still like 1 energy deal like 35. And with Vuln, which you should basically assume that the enemy is going to have, 1 energy deal 50. And like a kind of mid case. Just kind of gross, right? Again, compare a card like this that is unfair scaling to a card like Coordinate that's very fair scaling, or Ignition that's very fair scaling, and you start to see why some of these cards are just so much more overstated than the other ones and just outclass them entirely. Like there's a pretty big divide here, I think, at C and below, where cards just kind of get a lot worse. upper tiers, like they're just really, really insane cards. Okay, next up, Intercept. 1 energy, gain 9 block, redirect all incoming attacks that will be dealt to another player this turn to you. This is pretty similar to Tank. So this essentially just says like double the incoming damage to you, but gain 9 block. This requires one person to literally have no block on their turn, or want to play no block on their turn, which is not always common, right? You're not increasing the total amount of damage coming into the team, but you're just moving it around and gaining 9 block, which is not a terrible effect, but it's not unfair. And it's not very often that someone is completely incapable of blocking, and you also don't have one of 8 potion slots or more to cover that. Like, it's so much easier to just have a block pot and throw it at someone. And when you have 4 players rolling potions, you're gonna have something to cover that. There's a lot of ways to cover other than adding a card like this to your deck that oftentimes doesn't want to be played. This can often be negative to you because it also requires you to be over blocking by a lot, which doesn't always happen. Like, the way that the game is sort of balanced is that everyone has like block and damage thresholds per turn to meet. And when you play something like this, you're increasing your personal threshold, which is just obviously not very possible to meet all the time. Like, it's not easy for one player to block 40 in a turn, but it's pretty easy for like everyone to block like 20. You would need a lot of energy or really big block cards to meet that output check. Just kind of strange. I think overall this is like C tier. It's not unfair. It's not the worst thing of all time, but it's not as imbalanced as some of these other top tiers. Speaking of which, Knockdown. 3 energy attack, deal 10 damage. The enemy takes double damage from other players this turn. This is a completely unfair card, okay? If you look at flanking, it pretty much reads that for 3 energy instead of 2. But the difference here is that the upgrade goes to triple damage, which if you do the math again, if you say I play Knockdown, I pass my turn, I do 0 damage, right? You have 3 other players doing damage. Doubling goes to 6. Tripling goes to 9. When you play Knockdown, you essentially say my team is 9 players this turn. That is not balanced, okay? Damage multiplication is insane and works with stuff like Vuln, works with flanking. Just completely absurd, and can combine with something like a big, hammer time sword that someone else has, or a gang up, or even have people play energy surge to cover you to allow you to play this, or a believe in you to allow you to play this, right? When you have a card like this in your deck and someone's running believe in you or multiple believe in yous, it gets easier for you to be able to like draw into this and play it reliably, and that can be your entire strategy. Also, people can pop like attack pots on the turn that this gets played. Like, basically just one shot the boss. Disgusting, disgusting, disgusting card. This is like probably better than flanking. One, because everyone can see it. You have more chances at seeing this unless you're running all silence, basically. It is rare, but you see it in shops, and there's a lot of ways to see colorless cards, especially from card gen with like Regent or whatever. But triple damage is just absolutely absurd. I think overall that's worth more than playing flanking for 1, playing triple damage for 3. I think just like the damage increase is just better than the reduced cost of flanking. Like, flanking is less output, Knockdown's more expensive, but I don't care about paying the energy cost because when I play this energy cost, I don't have to block, the fight ends. And that's the nice thing about this expensive kind of card is I don't have other requirements to do on my turn. Like, if I played single player and I had a card that said Knockdown, next turn the enemy takes triple damage, it's still worth it. But on the turn I played, I'm taking like 30 to my face. And in multiplayer, you're not taking that damage. You're just ending the fight immediately, and that's just disgusting. Really, really gross card. Next up, we have Lift. 1 energy, give another player 11 block. This is sort of strange. I don't often want to pay 1 energy to give someone else block because it means I'm probably not meeting block requirements, right? If I'm picking this card, it means that I'm blocking really well, and then hopefully you're doing something else with your energy other than blocking for someone else. Like, yes, you do get to pick and it covers someone's brick. It's just okay. It's not unfairly statted like a lot of these other cards. Again, Beacon of Hope, way better than this, right? This, way better. Like, anything that scales multiple people at once, way, way better. This card is just not unfair. It's a very fair card, but a lot of characters, like, if you just play this in single player, 1 energy gain 11 blocks, pretty decent card. But compared to these, like, there's nothing comparable to Knockdown in single player, okay? Like, the ceiling for multiplayer cards is so much higher that we're comparing them to the absolute broken, busted stuff, and it just doesn't meet that. kind of a B tier card for me. I think the biggest problem is that it makes it harder for you to block on that turn. So you're probably just saying like, instead of another person bricking, I'm bricking, which is not great, right? You don't want to like necessarily have trade-offs. You want like unfair, everyone gets an advantage, not just like one person gets an advantage. Let's go ahead and skip the next card and move to the card after it, because I think it's a very fair comparison to Lift, which is Rally, which has 2 energy. All players gain 12 block. This upgrades to 17. Just disgusting. Just completely disgusting. This is an unfair version of the previous card, okay? You get 12 block. This is a really good block card for you, but also just blocks for everyone. Just crazy front load block card. I think this is very easily S tier. Like every time I've had this, it just has 2 energy, block 48. Okay. And if you upgrade it, it's like just a disgusting number, right? Like, like just not at all remotely fair. And it doesn't even exhaust. Like you can loop this. So this can be someone's entire block engine. And if you have any dexterity to scale this, it scales everyone's block. On top of the upgrade just being really, really absurd. So again, when you have cards like this that are just really oversided for you and don't make you sandbag and also help the team, they're just insanely good. If you have Beacon of Hope with this, it's even better. Everyone else blocks 18, you still block 12. Like it still works for you. Really, really, really gross. I don't think I have to explain much more behind this, but I think you're seeing the pattern of if they work for everyone cards, they're probably pretty good unless they're just like kind of understated. Again, compare this to Legion of Bone. This says everyone blocks 6, exhaust. This is everyone block 12, don't exhaust. Which, yeah, just not a fair comparison, right? At all. Like, and the upgrade's way better as well. Like, just kind of crazy. The way you can evaluate Spire cards has always been just turning them into numbers. And when you read a card that says 2 energy, block 48, it's not hard to understand why that's really broken. Or everyone deals triple damage, like have 9 players doing damage. That's not okay. Okay. Mimic. 1 energy, gain block equal to the block on another player, exhaust. This is essentially a block card that can read like block the highest amount that your team can block, which is often like 15 or 20 block for 1 energy. So as a selfish card, very, very good. Not anywhere close to something like Rally or a Beacon of Hope or whatever in terms of actually scaling the team. But just as a front-loaded block card for you, this is basically always going to block 15 or 20 because someone's going to be over blocking or like didn't draw attacks or whatever and can do that, right? Or has dedicated their deck to trying to do that. Really easy card to just kind of pick up and slam in the deck. Probably bottom of A tier here, along these other cards that are just really strong effects for one player. Very, very, very solid. Just not quite on the level of the absolute broken stuff. And I think like in single player, when you're looking at the S tier of cards, you're not like, wow, these cards are the most insane thing ever. Sometimes like I don't see Noxious Fumes in S tier and a tier listing go like, wow, that is completely broken. Like I don't think Fumes is completely broken. All of these cards are completely broken. Okay. Just the ceiling on multiplayer, again, I want to reiterate, is so much higher. It's just not acceptable how different it is. Okay, next up we have Tag Team. 2 energy, deal 11 damage. The next attack another player plays on the enemy is played an extra time. This essentially says 2 energy, deal 11 plus the highest amount of damage that a teammate can do with coordination. With Vuln, it's a lot better, right? But copy the best attack from 3 other players that turn. That's pretty good. Like 11 damage for 2 is not even like a horrible rate on its own, but this often just reads like 2 energy deal 30 or 40, especially like if people have really expensive stuff. And yeah, it does last over turns. So you can use it with the Hammer Time swords that everyone has, right? Or just the Regent player has a big sword and you copy that. Like it works with a lot of stuff. If you just have any good attacks, an uppercut, for example, like so many things. Again, just turn this into numbers. 2 energy, deal 35, vuln, weak the enemy twice. It's like super uppercut or like a pommel strike or whatever. Like you've got so many things. Like even just copying a vanilla deal 20 damage makes this deal 31. So no matter what, that is a crazy, crazy amount of output. It's not necessarily the same as Gang Up, but you could copy a Gang Up. I think it's harder to get to work than Gang Up because it does require someone to have like a good attack. But even if you're just copying like a kind of middling big attack, even if it's like the Ironclad card that's like 18 damage, exhaust a random card in your hand, or like someone's Pounce that deals 14, That's still really strong. No upgrades deal 25, kind of good. And a lot of attacks do more than just damage, like generating orbs or applying weakness or applying vuln. You've got a lot of other effects that are really strong. Draw cards, right? Meta scaling. It gets really broken with coordination. It just requires people to not just like be blitzing out their cards. And I do think that that's probably how most people are playing multiplayer at this point, like just shit posting with their friends, which is fine. I have nothing against that. I think that's probably how the game is meant to be played, really. But if you are trying to sweat, the total output on this card is really high, probably close to gang up. I wouldn't say it's quite gang up. It's just a really good front-loaded damage card. I'll put it underneath Sneaky, I think, in like sort of middle of A. I forgot to include Huddle Up. 1 energy, all players draw 2 cards, exhaust. Basically reads 1 energy, everyone draw 8. And this upgrades to draw 3 cards, so draw 12. If you compare it to a lot of the really broken stuff, it is pretty comparable. Very, very strong acceleration piece. It's essentially just on-demand Glimpse Beyond, because it draws like the same amount, kind of. It's like comparable, even though this is like needs the upgrade to be better. It's comparable. Like you have to upgrade Huddle Up, so I don't think it's as good. Probably at the bottom of S tier. Letting all the other players draw into their combo pieces to line up their stuff is really powerful, especially when you have really broken combos like Knockdown into more attacks. Like, because the combo potential is so much higher in multiplayer, drawing for everyone is even better than it would be normally. So if that changes, maybe it gets dropped down, but I don't care that this says exhaust on it. It doesn't need to be reusable. Like, you play this and basically everyone's deck functions way better and you just win immediately. Not a whole lot to say about this. I think just a really, really good acceleration piece. Not a super like interesting card, just like very overstated and broken. Okay. Yeah, not a ton of multiplayer cards, but we did talk about them for quite a while. Overall, I think like you kind of have to look at the multiplayer cards as some of these are completely unfair. And so when we're comparing them to something like Tag Team, that's maybe a bit more fair. But like in single player, if you had something like this, it would be very strong. And also just with the way multiplayer works, where people often are going to have combo pieces to work with your stuff, it's a lot easier to line this sort of thing up, which also bumps it up. Like there's a lot of considerations going into why certain things are placed the way they are. But for the most part, you can see that this is a very lopsided tier list, like on the top end. The overall power level of multiplayer cards is just really, really high, which contributes in part to why multiplayer is easier than single player, but is not the full picture. And again, I will be making a guide to go over a lot of the big evaluation differences between single player and multiplayer, instead of doing individual tier lists for multiplayer on every character, because I don't think every card changes really that much. There's only some that change a lot. Just a handful of things we need to go over, and then probably a lot of the core concepts and ideas that will make multiplayer easier, but this should be a good launching point, at least for if you see this, just click it and you probably win. Anything in S tier is just absurdly overstated. I'm debating on moving Hammer Time up to S, to be honest. I think it can. It just needs the Regent player to also be forging a lot, which is maybe an extra hoop to jump through, so maybe it's not quite as broken. But yeah, really, really absurd. Just looking at these cards, even the bad ones, quote unquote bad, are just kind of statted really nicely, like heavily. In single player, if you have a card that's like lose 1 HP, gain like 11, 10 block or whatever, that's very strong. Or this, gain 11 block, very strong block common. A lot of things that just are very strong in single player, but because of how top ended this is, we have to bump stuff down. But in general, most everything is just very powerful. Hopefully that makes sense. We did it. I like yapped for longer about this than I thought, but it's very cool. Like multiplayer is interesting for sure. I think that's it for this YouTube video, but again, stay tuned for the next one, and I will see you guys next time.